Welcome to MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 541. This program is dedicated in loving memory of Miriam Bas Eliyahu Altes Allah HaShalom and in merit of Baruch Binyamin ben Menucha Lana Altes. Yukusil ben Leah Rachel and Rachel Bas Liba Farkash is dedicated by Pinchas Tadris ben Miriam and Sarah Bas Rachel Altes. I hope everyone had a wonderful, freeing, transcendent, and liberating and meaningful Pesach. We're now literally a week from the end of Pesach, acronyms Pesach, outside of Eretz Yisrael, last Sunday. And I personally had a really powerful experience together with close to 1,000 other Jews, men, women, and children in close to Atlanta, near Atlanta. And as I said, I hope all of us and everyone, especially in Eretz Yisrael, had a truly transcendent Pesach and one that will continue to last throughout the entire year, being that we're literally ending now the Chodesh geulah, the month of redemption. We're going into Rosh Iyar as we speak, that this is a transition from the geulah of Pesach, b'nisan nigalu, b'nisan asidin ligoil, that from the redemption of Passover, we shall come to the redemption, the final and total redemption, geulah amitis v'ashlema. So this is a central theme that is very relevant to our time in general, and specifically to these days that we're speaking right now, as we conclude the month of Nissan and go into the month of Iyar. So we have a very jam-packed program here for you that will address those topics, all in the context of Chassidus Applied, my life, applying it to our lives, our personal lives, our psychological, emotional lives. If this is the first time you're joining this program, please know that we have a website called chassidusapplied.com where you can submit any question. Nothing's off limits, nothing's taboo. No questions will not be addressed. You can do it completely anonymously at chassidusapplied.com. You can also find archives of all of our previous programs, plus many other resources that continue to grow. Check it out, chassidusapplied.com. I should mention we also have a twin site, which is called meaningfullife.com, that has many more universal themes that are not specifically in the language of formal language of Chassidus, but address many themes, meaningfullife.com. And I'll finally mention that recently we've begun Simon Jacobson, my name, simonjacobson.ai, where you can actually have a virtual conversation with me or chat. Check that out as well. There we have all the archives and all the inventory of all our content, both videos and text. And we're getting very powerful feedback, and I'd love to hear your feedback as well to that. Okay, let's get into the topics at hand. As I said, geulah, you can say in one word, you always want a headline. Geulah, redemption, is very much the theme of our times. First of all, coming from Pesach, which is the month of geulah, the holiday of geulah, Zman Cherusenu, and it's the beginning of all geulas. All geulas come as a continuation of Yetzias Mitzrayim, because Mitzrayim is referring to not just Egypt, all limitations, all constraints. So it represents every form of redemption, every form of liberation and emancipation is captured in Yetzias Mitzrayim. So it's Reish L'Kol HaGolios. Mitzrayim is both the beginning and the head, all encompassing of all exiles, but also Hashem Shemitzidus L'Yisrael, because they caused distress to Israel, which is the essence of all geulas, displacement, and also geulas Mitzrayim. Yetzias Mitzrayim represents all the geulas. That's why Kiemeit Seis Chemeretz Mitzrayim Aden and Flois. Just as when we left Mitzrayim, I will show you wonders in the geulah amitis v'ashlema. So though it's a far greater geulah and one that will be permanent, it all begins. That's why we say Elamase Bnei Yisrael Sheyotzu Mitzrayim. But Elamase, they only traveled one journey from Mitzrayim to the next place where they went. But nevertheless, all 42 journeys, which also reflect all the journeys throughout all the thousands of years, are all part of the journey out of Mitzrayim until we get to the geulah amitis v'ashlema, which is indeed why at the end of the Seder, in general the Seder, but especially at the end, we talk about the geulah amitis v'ashlema. Being that we're now in the end of the month of Nisan, which is still all under the effect of geulah, that's why it's called Chodesh geulah. The whole month is called geulah. So that's the central theme. Now we also know the end of Pesach, Achar Pesach, is actually the Haftarah that we say. The entire day is especially focused on when we have the power and the energy of Mashiach, and that's why the end of Achar Pesach, the Baal Shem Tov instituted Mashiach Suda, the meal of Mashiach, to manifest it in our lives. So as we come from those days, and we're concluding Nisan, and we go into Iyar, we are in the presence of geulah, which also explains, as we shall discuss soon, one of the most impassioned talks that the Lubavitcher Rebbe ever gave on the 28th of Nisan, the end of Nisan, literally coming from Pesach, about geulah, which we'll discuss shortly. But to go in an orderly way, I think the best way to go is to go in the chronological order, being that tonight is Rosh Chodesh, and that Rosh Chodesh Iyar. Rosh Chodesh is always going from the last day of the last month of Nisan, going into the next month. So let's begin with that, and we'll move from that. We'll go back and talk about Beis Iyar. We'll talk about the 28th of Nisan. We'll talk about some post-Pesach ideas, all as we carry that forward, that geulah. Should also add that the Alter Rebbe did not put Chasal Siddur Pesach, or Seder Pesach, Siddur Pesach, in the Haggadah, because Pesach never ends. The energy of Pesach continues on, which is the energy of geulah. Now, a few more words about geulah. Geulah, remember, is not just a release and a freedom from prison. Geulah is also a consciousness thing. It's an emotional, psychological approach to life. That we are not trapped by anything. We're not victims of anyone. We are servants of God. And as such, we're free. We're truly free. Our souls are free. Like the Rebbe Rashab, the Friedrich Rebbe, and the Rebbe would very, very many times repeat it. Neshama is kemlich gegangen in Golos. And Neshama doesn't go into Golos. The Neshama goes into our body. And in that sense it is Golos, but the Neshama is never in Golos. And it's the Eibishter that takes us into Golos and takes us out of Golos. So there's an element that we are free entities, free meaning that we're not bound, even though we're natural creatures, and that we are bound by many laws, the laws of nature, but there's a part of us that is divine. And even though the Shechina begalusa and the Shechina also goes with us into Golos, but there's always a dimension, the inner dimension of the Neshama, that always remains transcendent. And that's the energy of Pesach that's meant to help us, that helps us free ourselves from all forms of bondage, whether it's physical, spiritual, psychological, emotional. And we'll discuss this more as we go along. So, as I said, we're going into Rosh Chodesh Iyar. What is Rosh Chodesh Iyar? Continues, it's the Chodesh Hasheni. Nisan is the Chodesh Harishon in the lunar cycle, and Iyar is the second month. And it's a continuation, as we see also from the mitzvah of Seudas Moshiach, which begins, we count the second day of Pesach, the second night of Pesach, the second day of Pesach, and it continues through the whole month of Iyar into Sivan, the third month, which will be the month when we come to Matan Torah, when we conclude the 49-day count and go into the 50th day. So the question is, what lessons do we learn from this month, Iyar? So number one, it's the second month from Nisan. And there's all things, when you say the number two, you're saying, what's the number one? So in general, one, Chodesh Nisan is like Chesed. Chodesh Sheni is like Gvura, like in the days of the week. Chesed is Am Shacham al Mailo. Nigla Aleim Melch Malcham Lochem HaKadosh Baruch Hu V'Go'alam. The Eibishter revealed himself and took the Jews finally out of Golos. Al Kamfei Nesharim. Like you would take, like an eagle carries its chicks on its wings. Iyar, Chodesh Hasheni, is now the Aveda Mata L'Mayla, where we begin. And that's what Seudas Moshiach, we start counting, we start preparing for Matan Torah, refining ourselves. That's the Chodesh Hasheni. So that's the first thing. The Aveda B'Koyach Atzmi, the Aveda that we are doing, to prepare for Matan Torah, which will join the Chesed and Gvura, Tiferes at Matan Torah, the third month. Also, the month of Iyar, another aspect, is in the very name of the month. So Iyar has two Rosh Tevis. One is Rosh Tevis Avram Yitzchak Yankiv Rachel, the Dal Dragle Hamarkova, the 4 feet, the 4 wheels, if you could say, the 4 pillars of the chariot. Avram Yitzchak Yaakov, which is Chesed Gvura Tiferes, and Rachel malchus. Another Rosh Tevis, Ani Hashem Reifecha. I, God, am your healer from the Pasuk in Mishpatim. That is, I am the ultimate healer, Hashem. So Iyar has both those elements as well that give us that strength. First of all, the strength of the structure of Atzilus, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, and Malchus. Avram, Yitzchak, Yankov are the three of us, of course, with the 3 main pillars of the Chesed to the right, Gvura to the left, Tiferes in the center. But Malchus is manifested into Biyah, the mother. Rachel Mevaka al Banea. Rachel is the quintessential mother of Klal Yisrael, of Knesset Yisrael, channeling it into Biyah, into the material world, all the way into the material world below. This energy, that's what radiates. So we have that power. And Ani Hashem Reifecha. Also, so all of this, even though Iyar is Mamat L'mayla Arveda, but we're getting the keiches from Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Rachel, and from Hashem Reifecha. Hashem himself is healing us. Yes, he heals through his agents. Nitn Rishus L'Reifel Arapis. He gave permission for a healer to heal. But still never forget, the real healer is Hashem. He's just using, these are all ambassadors, just agents, just a Gegarzim Biyad HaChesiv, like an axe in the hands of the axeman. So it's all Hashem working through these channels. Ani Hashem Refacha is also in a way that's a healing, like Chatchilale Osam Alecha. When God heals, it says, it's not a healing that comes after an illness, it's as if the illness was never there in the first place. Now, why is the ear connected to illness? Because remember, we have to be refining our midas. One of the reasons, as we shall also soon discuss, is because during this period is when the students of Rabbi Akiva, because they didn't show respect for each other. Because the fact of the matter is, even though you have the geulah of Nissan, but you still have to refine yourself, and you don't have the full refinement, people can show disrespect, especially great people, because of their passions. So the work we do, as we go out of Mitzrayim, is to now divest ourselves from the negative attributes, refine our emotions as we prepare ourselves for Matan Torah. So healing is critical, but we get the Ani Hashem Refecha. God is helping us in this healing and this growth and this repair and this rectification, which is the concept of Birur Hamidis, of the Nefesh Abamis, of the animal soul, as we prepare for the receiving of the mandate from Hashem on Matan Torah. This tells us all this tells us is that the month of Iyar is a critical month, coming with the power of Nissan, that we now have to take all that energy and manifest it in our personal lives, personal refinement. And indeed, we see during this month, we read chapters that talk about sanctifying ourselves. In this Parsha Shmini we began, but we'll continue in Sazriya Metzera and Achri Gedeshim and Emer. And the continuing chapters all talk about sanctifying. Even the mitzvah of Seudas Moshiach is in Parsha Emer. V'sfartem lachem, malchus HaShabbos. What's sfartem? It means to count, but it also means to refine. From the word sapir, it means to shine, to glow from like a sapphire stone. It also has the meaning of telling a story, sipur. So it's not just counting days, it's also refining the days, making them shine, making them glow. Kizer harakia, to glow like the light, like the luminary of the heavens. So that is the general thrust of this month. So it's a month of personal refinement, of taking the energy of redemption of Mitzrayim and personalizing it, integrating it in our lives, internalizing it. From Rosh Chodesh, which Rosh Chodesh, like a Rosh, is a head that encompasses everything that comes from the head, of the entire body, same thing in all the days of the month. We go right into the next day, Beis Iyar. Beis Iyar is the birthday of the Rebbe Marash, the 4th Chabad Rebbe, youngest son of the Tzemach Tzedek. Came the Rebbe after the Tzemach Tzedek. He was the 3rd Rebbe. So someone asked the question, is there a connection between Tiferes of Tiferes and the Chatchila ariber? Between the energy of the Rebbe Marash's birthday, on Tiferes within Tiferes, and the energy of the Chatchila ariber. Answer is obviously yes. But let's first explain what we're talking about. So Tiferes of Tiferes is the sphere of Beis Iyar. That's the corresponding sphere. Each day of the sphere, like we said, is a refinement of the emotion, starting from Chesed Shebechesed, going through first the week of Chesed, then the week of Gvura, and then we come to the week of Tiferes, the third week, of compassion, of empathy, of beauty. Tiferes is unique. It's also the Kavem Tzoi, it's the middle rod. Mavriach min hakotza lakotza, that connects the highest to the lowest. Tiferes within Tiferes, the beauty within beauty. So we have a story from the Rebbe Marash when he was 6-7 years old. So he was being fahed by his teacher, and his teacher saw how excellent he did, and the Tzemach Tzedek responded when he heard that, what's the pella? What's the surprise? Someone that was born Tiferes Shebet Tiferes. So you see right away how the day, Mazoli gave it, the day Yom Godim, the day itself reflects the power of this neshama. What's L'chatchila ariber? L'chatchila ariber is an expression from the Rebbe Marash that we find, that Friedrich Rebbe writes about in his letters. The Rebbe turned it into a central theme of the Rebbe Marash's very Nesius leadership. So the word goes like this. The Rebbe Marash said, the Welt sagt, the world says, am kenish darunter geht man ariber. When you can't go below, you go above. Ich sag, and I say, l'chatchila ariber. Darf l'chatchila initially go from above. In other words, don't go the regular ways or underneath and so on. Go l'chatchila ariber. So this became an expression of doing something initially with a bang, with a breitkeit, with a expansiveness. Many people start small, and if it doesn't work, they go bigger, they go over. There's an obstacle, they first try to go under it or around it. They can't, then they try to go over it. Chatchila aribers means you go l'chatchila above it. You just go with an approach of a winner from the outset. And this was the Rebbe Marash's Nesius, with harchova, with expansiveness. The Rebbe brings many examples for it. How the Tzemach Tzedek lived in a very mitzumtzum way, tzumtzum financially. And when he was given a gift, he would give it to the Rebbe Marash. The Rebbe Marash lived harchovadik. It's different drachim and aveda. There's sometimes a need for expansiveness. There's sometimes a need for a more frugal approach. So that Rebbe Marash embodied the Chatchila Rebbe to the point that the nigun of the Rebbe Marash that we sing, then it continues, goes higher and higher. And the Rebbe called it l'chatchila ariber. There was a time Chassidim would call it Ein Svei Drei Vier, because even though it's a song without words, but a certain part of it, say Ein Svei Drei Vier. The Rebbe called it l'chatchila ariber. So is there a connection? That connection is obvious. Tiferes Shebet Tiferes. Tiferes is already ariber. Tiferes is higher. Chesed, Gvura are right, left. They have their locality. Tiferes is kavem tzoi. Goes min hakotza lakotza from one end to the next. Covers the whole ground. Tiferes Shebet Tiferes. Chatchila ariber. What is the lesson to us? Very often the Rebbe would say the lesson from the Chatchila ariber is how we approach our lives. When we're facing obstacles, and facing challenges, financial challenges, personal ones, any impediment. And it makes sense that we're coming from Yetzias Mitzrayim, is going out of Mitzarim v'Gvulim, medalig ala horim, mekapetz ala gvois. Medalig, to jump over mountains, and mekapetz, and to leap over gvois, over hills. And right that takes us into the month of Iyar, into Beis Iyar, l'chatchila ariber, Tiferes Shebet Tiferes. It's an approach in life, as halcha b'rechava, to go with a breitkeit, with a expansiveness. We all have challenges, but the challenges should not stop us. Definitely not emotionally and psychologically. Always have the attitude that we will prevail. A winning attitude, a psychologically winning attitude, a positive attitude, a confident attitude. On a very basic level, which of course fits into the entire theme of the month of Iyar. So here we go right into Iyar with all its difficulties and challenges, including what happened to the Talmidim, the students of Rabbi Akiva, but we go in with Rosh Chodesh's power of Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Rachel, Ani Hashem Refecha, and now the Rebbe Marash and Beis Iyar, ariber, Tiferes of Tiferes. How do we personalize this day? I believe I just answered that. We personalize it by applying it to our own personal lives. Now someone will say, 1 second, I feel down, I feel down. What do you want me to do? You can't regulate feelings, but you can regulate actions. And you can regulate who you're with. And you can regulate commitments. So even when a person is a bit down, but if you're committed to something, you have to fulfill it. Work with others. So with many ways to personalize the ariber approach in our lives. Being around people who have that attitude. Committing to things that force you to have that attitude, even when you're not always in the mood. And in general, tying yourself and thinking, what did the Rebbe want from me? What would the Rebbe Marash want from me? These are motivators that help lift you up. So, yes, it's not atzme, you're not alone. You're standing on the feet, you're standing on the shoulders, I should say. You're on the feet, you're standing on the shoulders of giants before us. And they lift us up to places that are beyond, when you think of what they expect of us, what they see in us. Sometimes we don't always see our own potential. And that great potential is what is actualized through the ariber, Tiferes of Tiferes in the month of Iyar. Being that yesterday, Shabbos, was Chof Ches Nissan, as I mentioned before, there was a passion talk that the Rebbe gave 34 years ago in Tafshin Nun Aleph. So I want to address that, and I think it's very contextual. We're not, even though it's before Beis Iyar and Chodesh, but I first wanted to talk about the immediate days, right where we are right now. But it's all connected because, like I said, we're coming from the month of geulah, and I should mention Mismach geulah, the geulah Nissan comes after the month of Adar, which is also a month of geulah of Purim. So I have tremendous powers to be able to get beyond geulah. Geulah is the opposite of the ariber. Geulah is when you feel diminished, when you feel weak, when you feel limited. Geulah is when you feel expansive. So even though the full expansiveness will be oz, the real smile, the real expansiveness will be when Mashiach comes, but we're still obligated, we're still asked, we're demanded of us that we should be b'simcha now. The Rebbe even expressed himself in some of the later years that Eina Dover Toli Geulah in Simcha, an attitude of joy, of confidence, upbeat attitude. There are many reasons some person can give excuses and reasons why, and even legitimate ones, not to be fully joyous. But that's what we're given. So when you think of it that way, so then all this whole process, Mismach Adar into Nissan, and Nissan, of course, Chodesh HaGeulah, B'Nissan Nigalu, and then in Pesach itself, then comes Pesach itself. We have also Nissan, of course, we have Rosh Chodesh Nissan, then we have Beis Nissan, is the Yortzeit, the Stalkus of the Rebbe Rashab, the beginning of the Nesius of the Friedrich Rebbe. Then you have your Aleph Nissan, the Rebbe's birthday. Yud Gimel Nissan, the Yortzeit, the Stalkus of the Rebbe, of the Tzemach Tzedek. And then, of course, Pesach. And Pesach, Achar Pesach. Mamash Hadei of Geulah, Seudas Moshiach, after the Haftarah about Pesach, about Mashiach. And then, so it's not a surprise, that came Chof Ches Nissan, a few days after Pesach, where the Rebbe spoke that impassioned, that dramatic talk that he gave, Tafshin Nun Aleph. So let's address that, and see from that how that continues to translate into the days after Chof Ches Nissan. So the obvious question is, what exactly did the Rebbe mean by the words when he said, Ich bin Tut Altz, I did everything. Now, Tut Altz Vos. Tut Altz Vos. So first let's start with I don't like to read negative questions, but since it's a question that comes from many people, how can we not feel despair after hearing the Rebbe's words on Chof Ches Nissan? If the Rebbe, with all his knowledge, experience, and talent, wasn't able to successfully bring the full revelation of Mashiach, then what chance do we have? And it's a question people have had. I have to be very honest, I never had that question, even when I heard the Sikha the first time, definitely not after thinking about it. And I think a lot of people also came to understand that the Rebbe was speaking a lot broader than what it may appear to some people. Because the Rebbe didn't just say, then bring Mashiach. He said, I did everything I can do. So the some can interpret that means, okay, too bad, I didn't succeed. But the Rebbe continued. He said, Tut Altz Vos, which means he's giving us the keiches to continue from where the Rebbe left off, if you wish. But more than left off, because he continues to give us the keiches. A Rebbe is a Rebbe. The Rebbe, how many times did the Rebbe say, Lo yaziv tzei marise? A shepherd never forsakes the sheep. But the Rebbe then said the opposite, God forbid. You have to understand that context. The Rebbe was expressing, if you want to use the word frustration, yeah, as long as the geulah is not here, the Rebbe was not happy. Because the geulah is the ultimate mission. He was saying, if you look at the Sikh of Purim Tavshim Mem Zayin, the Rebbe is saying, I did everything I can. You want me to speak another Sikh, another Rambam, it'll be published, it'll be printed, it'll be put on shelves. I did what I can do. Now you have to do what you have to do. Tut Altz Vos. So in other words, Kavyochel, the Rebbe is saying, there are things that you must do that I cannot do for you. You have to do it. Now, in Purim Tavshim Mem Zayin, the Rebbe explained, because of Yeridas Haderes. There may have been a time, of course, if Adam and Chava, for example, did not eat from Chet Eitzadas, Moshiach would have come. If they did not build a Chet Egel, there was no Chet Egel, and Moshe would have led the Yidden into Eretz Yisrael, the geulah would have come. There were many such situations. And then it would have come more Mamayla Lamata. With every time that there was another, either setback or transgression or concealment, now it has to come more from bottom up. The Mittler Rebbe explains at length the difference between Zochu and Lo Zochu. Ito and Achishena. That ultimately there is a maila that happens in time, even though we want the geulah to come immediately. But at Adam and Chava, the geulah came then it would have been like the Alter Rebbe explains in Tereir in the beginning, like a Eiravuka, like a big torch that would have drawn all the Rapach Netzutzes, all the 288 sparks from all over the world. Mamayla Lamata. It would have been there, Aveda Mamat Lamayla, but they wouldn't have to travel to all over the world. So essentially our transmigration, which is ultimately Golus, after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, is Stokos HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael Shepizram Lebein HaUmes. He separated, he spread them around, even though we say Golinu Martzeinu Mepnei Chateinu, because they could gather these sparks, and now it's an Aveda Mamat Lamayla, much more Bepnimius. Because you could ask the question, what's the Chiddush of geulah if it comes now, or if the geulah would have come after Adam and Chava? It's the same thing, what was accomplished all these thousands of years. Now it's Bepnimius, it's through and through, because it's now Veda. We traveled all over the world, we suffered all the generations, the Mesiras Nefesh. So the Rebbe is adding one more slav that went over from Hanosi Ta'koel, that's the language from Purim Mem Zayin. And Chof Ches Nissan, Tut Altz Vos. The Rebbe is not, God forbid, Chaz v'shalom, abrogating or his responsibilities. The Rebbe remains a Rebbe. But he's telling us this is what we need to do. He was expressing it. He wished it would have happened through his work. Meaning the Rebbe doing it with our little efforts, the Rebbe would have taken care of it all. But clearly there had to be something more. And that's where we are right now. So do we like that? No, of course we prefer the geulah had come already, and that's that. And it's interesting, Chof Ches Nissan. Mamish, after Achon Pesach, Mashiach Suda, we have so much power from Mashiach Suda, and the Haftarah of Mashiach that the Rebbe said on that Achon Pesach. A few days afterwards comes Chof Ches Nissan, and going right into Iyar, which is Aveda Mamat Lamayla, Chodesh Hasheni, as I described and discussed earlier. So the next question, of course, is, Tut Altz Vos, what more can we do? It's 34 years now. What more can we do? So we know Farbrengens have been going on the last 34 years, and I'm sure this year as well, and with good intentions, and there's no question that many people have added, increased. Remember, as the Rebbe said, Tut Altz means everything possible. The Rebbe specifically spelled out a few things which we'll talk about shortly, but Yidden have been doing things for all Zeit. But clearly there's still more to be done. Now in the Sikha, the Rebbe did speak about Golas Pnimi, meaning that ultimately we have to deal with our own internal resistance. Are we living geuladik? Geulah consciousness. Because the geulah pnimi means in the mind, in the heart, in the emotions, in your being. As we spoke earlier, geulah is not just walking out of a prison. It's getting out of the prison mentality. And Golus has worn us down, let's be honest. We were born in Golus. That's the only thing we know. So a person in darkness is in darkness. So before I continue, I want to just say that I dedicated this last Mitzvah Shabbos last night. I give a class every week in Tanya. So I dedicated to Chof Ches Nissan. So in addition to what I'm going to say here in this program, I refer to that. That's also on our website. You can find it easily on ChassidusApplied.com. It's worthwhile listening to, in my opinion. But briefly, one of the key things I focus on there is, based on what the Rebbe said, to learn about geulah Mashiach, which I'll spell out shortly, is that we need to get into that consciousness. This doesn't mean that we can become suddenly complete geulah people, but we can definitely make a shift. So you have to start defining what's a golus mentality and what's a geulah mentality. And there are many ways to do that. And a very practical, you have to envision what would your life look like right now. Where you are, wo du stehst und gehst. Your room, your house, your environment, your community, your street. What would it look like if the geulah came? Many people can't answer that question. How do you answer the question? Not using your imagination, learning about it. When you learn Chassidus, Chassidus is about elikus, gili elikus. Whether it's the gili of Atzilus or Bri, Yetzirah, Si, or higher, Eid Ein Sof. So though you can't say I'm completely living every level that Chassidus teaches us, but the more you understand, the more you learn it. Mipsari erzalaka. And the more you make it part of your life by seeing examples of it in your own flesh. My flesh shall behold God. What does that mean? That's Gili Mashiach. The Alter Rebbe says at the beginning of chapter 37 in Tanya that this Gili of Yemesa Mashiach and Tchis HaMes, which is Gili Eid Ein Sof Be'elam Hazeh Agashmi, is Ayidei Masenu B'Avedesenu. Why? What's the connection? Because Masenu B'Avedesenu, our actions are bringing elikus every time you do a mitzvah, every time you do a kind thing, every tzedakah you give, as he speaks later in the chapter, is a gili elikus in a small scale. It's like a building block. Now when they accumulate, then it erupts into what we call geulah klolis. So it's about seeing in your personal life that your actions are geuladik. What's not geuladik? When it's your own self-interest, self-absorbed. It's about me. As soon as it's doing what Hashem wants, whether it's a mitzvah, whether it's reshus, it's l'shem shamayim, whether it's a kind act, it could be an actual mitzvah, it could be divrei reshus l'shem shamayim, kol masech l'shem shamayim, kol derchecha de'eu. All that is a gili elikus in your life. So there's the action part, but there's also the mental part, the cognitive part, that recognizing this is gili elikus. You look at the world around you, and you say, this tree, it's not just a tree, it's a moshel. It's an example to teach us about godliness. Every moshel in Chassidus is a moshel for elikus. The more you can see godliness in your daily life, the more you're living Mashiachdik. As much as we can do with our own efforts. That's on a very basic level, Tut Altz Vos. Now, of course, there's much more to that. There's teaching it to others. There's implementing it through different Torah mitzvahs, especially mitzvahs that have us geulah for geulah, like tzedakah mekareves as a geulah. But overall, it's all about a deliberate effort in that way. Now, I am not going to be able to explain, I don't have an explanation why it didn't happen yet, the geulah, after all these years. And you mean well, and they're doing good things, and they're increasing. I'm not here to criticize. But as long as it's not come, we have to look at ourselves, what have I done? And look at ourselves. I'm not pointing fingers at others. Obviously, this goes further, especially in the context of Yefutza Meinesecha Chutza. Spreading Chassidus. That's what Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov. You want the geulah, you want me to come? When your wellsprings will spread outward. What's the connection to Baal Shem Tov's wellsprings to Mashiach? Because it's not the Baal Shem Tov's wellspring. Meinesecha is Meinesecha, that's Teirasa Shel Mashiach. Is the Torah we will learn when Mola Oretz Deis Hashem Kamayim Leyam Mechasim, when Lo Yeh Eser Kol Ha'elam El Ladasas Hashem Bolvad, that we'll learn about elikus. That's what Chassidus is. You learn about Chassidus. However, today, you don't see it fully. You learn that mayim, water, originates from chesed of Atzilus. So you may not see it, but the more you learn it, the more you can envision it. Fire originates from gvura of Atzilus. You eat a meal, you're elevating the sparks. The spark of the Hashem in it. Everything in life is exactly that. The more you get saturated with that, the more you're living Mashiach-dik. So that is a general attitude. And until geulah doesn't come, we cannot say, I did everything. Because clearly there's something still missing on our part. The Eibusher should have Rachmanis. Talk about the week of Tiferes. The Eibusher should have Tiferes, Rachmanis, compassion, empathy on us, and already bring the geulah. But we're talking about what we have to do from our end. What specific things did the Rebbe instruct us to do to help bring the geulah? So, I mentioned in general, more specifically in the weeks after Chof Ches Nissan, when the Rebbe spoke, he told us, Derech Yeshara, the direct way, is through Pasha Desof and Teira mitzvahs. Now that shouldn't be taken lightly, because sometimes you can do Teira mitzvahs, mechanically. Mitzvahs anoshim ulamada. The Rebbe is saying, no, the Desof and Teira mitzvahs has to be durgenumen with geulah dike thinking. Chayesaron Nun Beis, the Rebbe made that very strong emphasis on that. So don't just do a mitzvah. Think of the mitzvah as releasing the Mashiach dike energy, Mashiach dike consciousness. You make money. What's geulah? Geulah mentality. Money is for me. Now I'm a richer. I feel better about myself. I can buy more things. What's geulah mentality? The Eibusher gave me money, opportunity to give tzedakah, to help another person, to build something. Everything in life. I sit down to a meal. I'm hungry. I'm eating. Even if you're not eating in a way that's inappropriate. What's geulah mentality? I'm elevating this physical piece of food to elikus. I'm turning it into something divine. This table is a mizbeach, an altar. The meal is a korban, an offering. The energy I gain from it, the sparks that come, feed me, not just physically, but they feed that help me do a mitzvah, help me do a good deed. Technology could be used for nonsense. I'm not even talking about things not appropriate. It can be used just for business. It could be for entertaining yourself. Technology is a tool Hashem gave us, a koyach adir in the words of the Rebbe, power, awesome power, to be able to bring Torah and Yiddishkeit and kindness and beautiful kindness and goodness to other people in ways that are instantaneous, that transcend time and space. Everything has geulah and golus and geulah possibilities. And remember, geulah is geulah with an aleph. It's the same thing, it's just directed in the right place. So the Sikha, the Shabbos after Chof Ches Nissan, the Rebbe said, Derech Yesharet, Hisof and Teira mitzvahs. You're bringing the aleph of geulah, of Lufish Shalem into geulah that makes it geulah. And the Rebbe specifically said, Lil Medin Yana Geulah Mashiach, Pasha to learn about it. When you learn about it, you become aware that creates consciousness. You can't appreciate something if you don't know anything about it. If I told you now go learn about the zoology, you'll say, what's zoology? You have to study it to know what it is. Same thing with everything in life. You have to learn, lahavdil. And definitely geulah Mashiach. Or else it remains an abstract fantasy almost, to learn about it. Where do you learn about it? First of all, in the psukim. The Pasha talk, the Yehudim, as I said, the Haftarah of Yeshaya, the whole thing is about Mashiach. Yeshaya B'chlal, the Rambam says, Meleim, that Tanakh is filled, the Nach is filled with psukim about Mashiach. That's Torah Shebiksav, Torah Shebal Peh, in Gemara, in Chelik, in Perek Chelik, in Sanhedrin, and other places, the Yehudim lost it, love it. And then in Zohar, Pnimius HaTorah, and a kabolas, and a Prat Chassidus. And the Rebbe goes further, even Likutei Sichos, and the Sichos and the Maimonim that are through all the generations of the Rabbeim, because that's what Chassidus is. Tiferes of Mashiach. Not just Mashiach will teach Chassidus. Chassidus is about elikus. When you learn Nigla, you're learning about what the Eibusher wants. And Chassidus talks about the elikus and what he wants. Hilchos Shabbos will tell you how to keep Shabbos. Chassidus will tell you the elikus Shabbos. They go hand in hand, the neshama and the guf of Torah. Shmosa gufa derais. And then, of course, actions. In addition to learning about geulah Mashiach, to act on it. As the Rebbe said when CNN asked him by dollars, what's his message to the world? To increase in acts of goodness and kindness. That's a message to the entire world. To Yidden, of course, it's a mitzvahs maisius, including tzedakah, including other mitzvahs that are specifically have the feature of speeding up the coming of the geulah, tzedakah, and other mitzvahs like that. In that spirit, I'd like to share, someone wrote a nice little note about this, where it talks about a story about increasing acts of goodness and kindness. Not sure who writes this, but he writes, I know that Rabbi Schneerson taught that we must always look for ways to increase in acts of kindness, and I once read that he said we should write letters to him to give reports of the kindness we do, and that would be the best birthday present he can get. I'm happy to report that my daughter spent her own money and bought a bag of birdseed and spread them on our lawn to feed the birds and show them kindness. She said she wanted to do it because it would make the Rebbe happy to hear that we are doing kindness and would give him a happier birthday. She's only 7 years old. I'm so proud of her, and I hope that when she gets older, she continues and increases showing kindness even more. Okay, thank you for sharing. I'm going to pass this on to the Ohel. I'll send them a fax, or maybe if I'll be there, I'll give them this note. And I can't speak for the Rebbe, but I'm sure the Rebbe would say something of the nature she should only continue to do more kindness with birds and kindness with all human beings. And wherever she goes, she'd always bring light to other people. But I thank you for sharing that. Okay. How do we envision the geulah? So I gave some examples by looking at things. The example I often give is the letter from the Rebbe to the dry cleaners. And I spoke about it in my talk that I gave last night. Briefly, the kid said that the dry cleaners, can be more menial, more mundane than that? And the Rebbe says, no, you learn a lesson of how neshama can be purified, just like a beged, the clothing that can be dirty and soiled and wrinkled. You can refresh it through cleaners, through putting it into water, and the water into warm water, and with chemicals that get rid of the stains, and then put it on the heavy press, kabolas sale. The Rebbe says the same thing with the neshama. You place it into water, I'm saying it briefly. And warm water, vadamkeit, chmimus, passion. And mitzvahs, each mitzvah is a different chemical that cleans out the different stains from the different avedas. And then under kabolas sale, and it becomes like a neshama shenesata b'tahirihi. That's a beautiful message. But you look at a dry cleaner, is never the same way after that. Every dry cleaner is a lesson of a neshama. And the same thing with everything in this world. It's about looking at things through the lens of geulah. How the Rebbe would look at it, how Chassidus looks at it, how Torah looks at it. So it's like looking with Torah eyes at anything that exists. And we can teach this to our children. Every day find an example. They're going to sleep. Let's think about the bookcase in their room. How is it an example for malchus? Let's look at the bed. Let's look at a sink. Let's look at water. Besides, of course, the tefillas, Yot Chav Kidruvchi by evening and Moedani in the morning. But you can push it physically. See your own house to be a Mishkan LaHashem. And the more a child is attuned to that, the more they think that way. It takes effort in a chanami, because the fact is, in this world, is elikus is b'yischatzus, elam is b'pshitas. The world is a given, it's easy. And elikus is a novelty. But we can train ourselves to start looking at things through the eyes of gili elikus, and that is gili Mashiach. That's how we do it. There are many more examples, but we'll suffice with that for now. How do we achieve geulah consciousness? Same idea, is by envisioning geulah. That's how you achieve such geulah consciousness. But of course it takes also a contrast to understand, as I said, you have to always look at things. Here's the golus way of looking at it, here's the geulah way. Maybe even a good exercise to make 2 columns. And look at your life that way. Teach our children to look at life. This is the way a golus look would be. This would be a geulah consciousness look. As the Rebbe says in the famous sikh of Achri Gdeshim, Chof Ches Nun Aleph, and then Emer Chof Ches Aleph, talks explicitly about the Aleph, of putting the Aleph of Aluf Shalem and Achdus Hashem into geulah, into geulah, seeing in everything that we do the Aleph. But this leads to this following question. Why will the wolf be at peace with the lamb? Gor Zevim Keves is one of the Yehudim, which we said actually Achron Pesach. So someone wrote, on the last day of Pesach, we read the Haftarah from Meshaya with the amazing prophecies of the era of Mashiach. Someone in Shul commented and said that one explanation of the lion and lamb, well, there it talks about the lion and the God Aryeh. There's Gor Zevim Keves, one of them, they come together, even though they're mortal enemies, Bizman Hazeh. Resting together can be explained as during the time of Mashiach, the revelation of positive energy will be so pervasive and profound that even animals and inanimate objects will feel it, and therefore the lion and lamb will also experience a paradigm shift, and no longer will they fight and threaten each other. To me, this was a poignant explanation, and I never heard it put this way before. My question for Rabbi Jacobson is, has the Rebbe ever explained the future redemption in these terms or in similar terms? And can Rabbi Jacobson please share some of the Rebbe's teaching of what our daily lives will be like during the Messianic redemption? And may it come right away with no further obstacles. So, I gave several examples before, but this is indeed not just the Rebbe, in Chassidus in general, you find this explanation. Gar Zevim Kev is not just a miracle. It says, V'hizbeisi chayirah. There will no longer be, the Rebbe has a sikh in Chelik Zayin, Likutei Sichos, volume 7, in Bechukesai, V'hizbeisi chayirah, that the Eibishter in the future will eliminate violent or predatory animals from it. So you could say it's a miracle, or you could say no. It could be that the nature will change, because once they sense, like you said, this all-pervasive sense of purpose, they won't need to be aggressive like that. Now, we're not getting into the fact that even today, when they're aggressive, it's not, that's their nature, that's the way they were created. But the idea of destruction, lo yirei v'lo yashchisu, b'chol har kodesh, we say in the Haftarah, in Yeshaya, ki mol ha'aretz deis Hashem k'mayim liyom achasim. What does knowing that the world will be filled with divine knowledge have to do with no more evil and destruction? Because when there's deya, not just chachma and bina, das, when it's internalized and intimate, and deis Hashem, automatically there's no destruction. When you have moichin the godless, Chassidus speaks. Das, abad das, can coexist with others. He's not affected. It's small. It's klein keppeldigkeit. Moichin the katness, immaturity, that causes people to have conflicts with each other. So in that context, when the geulah has such a geulah l'kus, it makes sense. It'll be world peace. Like the Rambam says, lo yesham le malchama. There won't be war anymore. There won't be a reason for war. So it's not just that people will control themselves. The whole consciousness will be higher. When you're a higher level, things don't bother you. All the divisiveness, all this... besides that, we'll all see that we're all part of one higher and truer reality, all part of the divine unity. Oz epech halam himself abrur. Is Seudas Moshiach connected to Rebbe's words on Chof Ches Nissan? So I believe I answered that earlier. I would say yes. It seems pretty obvious that right after Achron Pesach, a few days later, the Rebbe spoke the Sikha. So even though he didn't explicitly make mention of it, but at least in my recollection, maybe in another Sikha, but it seems very much that energy, and we're still in the month of Nissan, Chof Ches Nissan. So it's definitely connected to that. Does partaking in a festive meal in honor of a certain event help manifest its reality? So someone wrote it this way. If the idea of making a Seudas Moshiach on the 8th day of Pesach helps Mashiach come faster, because it imbues our consciousness with the spiritual concept of Mashiach, thereby making it more of a reality in our physical world. So this leads to another question, but let me just embellish on that. Absolutely. The eating of Mashiach Suda that Baal Shem Tov instituted was making it a tangible reality. When you say in the Haftarah and you learn it and say it properly, it's also describing and you're envisioning it. But eating an actual meal, it's called Seudas Moshiach. And matzah, as the Rebbe emphasizes from the Rebbe Marash, the Baal Yei Meledes from Beis Iyar, that it's esen me'esta l'kus when you're eating matzah. And the Dal cases that the Rebbe Rashab instituted. And the whole Seudas Moshiach means that Mashiach is coming to chila v'shtiyah. An actual meal definitely makes it into reality. So now continuing the question, can we apply this to other things in life? For example, if a couple is married a long time without having children, can they make a special suda to thank Hashem for their future child, even though the child is not yet on the way? Would that help the couple to have a child faster? So that I would be very careful to consult with a Rav, with a Mashpia, because there's a certain thing. Seudas Moshiach was instituted by Baal Shem Tov. The Rebbeim did it. The Rebbe, of course. But to make a Suda on something like that I would be careful, because I don't know if it's Eis Gehalten to do that. But the idea of being able to, let's say, the Rebbe gives eitzes, that people should help build a summer camp for children, or give money for chinuch of children, or help children in general as a geulah to have children, that we have direct Torahs for. So I don't know if we would carry it over to every situation. That's why I'm saying, talk to your mashpia. If you want to connect it, you want to sponsor, let's say, a suda for children, for special children, for children that are in need. That could be, your kavanah could be, in order to b'chzuz that you should you should have children. But not just to do a suda, and think about that on its own, because it has to be in the mizgeres, in the structure, and in the context of Torah and Halacha. But the concept is definitely in spirit, the idea. Okay. Continuing along this line of discussion, I see there's a lot of questions. I'm going to try to cover as much as I can here. What is the meaning of kabolas malchus of Mashiach? Okay, so this has been something that has been discussed and disputed, argued about, all the Shem Shemayim surely. The Rebbe spoke about, like in the Sicha Chai Nun Beis, Tavshin Nun Beis, he said that we finished Avedis HaShlichus, now we have to kabolas seil malchus Mashiach. So I'll give you the simple interpretation that based on the Sichas of the Rebbe, Shmini, Nun Aleph, even Sazim, etc., Nun Aleph, other Sichas, including Chai Yisara in a way, that Tzemach Tzedek explains, and the Rebbe cites this very often, what is Mashiach? Before we have a kabolas el melech of malchus of the Mashiach, to know what is Mashiach. What are you accepting? What are you receiving upon yourself? So he says a Mashiach is a Rav and a Melech. On one hand, he's a teacher, like a Moshe Rabbeinu, who will teach Yilamed Teira l'Kol Ha'am Kulei. He'll teach all the Yid. So you have to see Mashiach as your teacher, as your ultimate guide. And Melech, your authority. A Rav is authority to a certain extent. He passes that, but a Melech is absolute. Moshe was also a Melech. Vayibashun Melech. So if you're saying kabolas el malchus of Mashiach would be to accepting Mashiach as your Rav and your authority, which means that you learn what he teaches, you learn what he learns, what he teaches, and you follow his instructions, like you would a Melech, with a chig v'le'yaver, without any compromise. A king decrees, that's what you do. What else do you need for kabolas el malchus of a Melech? That's how you makabel a malchus. Anything more than that has to come from Shemayim, from heaven. Someone will say that Mashiach Vadai, which the Rambam Paskins means as a Beis Iyar Shashlishi, and Kibbutz Goliath. So there'll be an anointment, Hachtaras HaMelech. What does that mean? So there you'll need to have Sanhedrin, you'll need to have authorities that'll tell us, they'll tell us how to, so to speak, more than what I've just said. But Pashtus today, it's not saying words, it's not lip service, it's literally accepting. If someone says, I accept Mashiach as my teacher and as my authority, I don't know if there's anything more than that. But that requires an Aveda Pnimius, because you're accepting something and you have to act on it. It's not just I say he's my teacher, he's my melech. You have to live by that. So this leads to the next question. Should we be telling people that the Rebbe is Mashiach? Some people feel that's the way you're makabel. So let me answer that in two parts. First of all, when the Rebbe speaks in the Sichas that the Nosi Ador is Mashiach Shebedor, he doesn't say you have to tell this to everyone. You could quote what it says. Chsam Sefer, the Bartanura, the Zdei Chemed. Then every generation is the Nosi Ador is Mashiach, but also, until the Eibusha doesn't tell him, he may not even know that he's Mashiach, as the Rebbe has also mentioned. So it's not about pointing fingers. I've been asked this question many times, as you could imagine. the answer, if someone asks you, is the Rebbe Mashiach, it's not up to your opinion. It's not your feeling, your hergish. This is a halachadika question. Let's step aside from our personal feelings about the Rebbe, about all these matters. Someone asks me, Havdil, someone asks a Supreme Court justice in the United States, do you believe in freedom of speech? His answer has to be, it makes no difference what I believe. The Constitution says so. I uphold the Constitution. Lahavdil elef avdolos. Someone asks if an individual is Mashiach, the answer has to be a Torah answer. What does the Torah say? What does the Eibishter say? If the entire world says a certain person is Mashiach and the Eibishter says no, he's not. It's not up for elections. It's not hergeshim based on a certain group, whether it's a Chabadnik or not a Chabadnik. If the whole world says someone is not Mashiach and the Eibishter says he is, he is. Moshe Rabbeinu came, not everybody accepted him. The Ziknei Yisrael was not so simple. It's not up for elections. It's a halachadika question. So the real answer should be like this. Study the Rambam, the criteria for Mashiach, Cheskes Mashiach, Mashiach Vade, etc. Then study the Rebbe's life, and you come to your own course, speak to your Rabbanim, and see, does it fit? You have another candidate, do the same thing. This takes it away from the emotions and the subjectivity and the partisanship. It's not a Chabad question. All Chabadniks believe that the Rebbe is Mashiach. That's not halachically accurate. Either it's pi halacha or not pi halacha. Now you do find students did say a certain their Rebbe was Mashiach. So we know that it's possible, but to actually say that, there has to be some common denominator. There's a criteria, and then you can define and say, here's a person. So this is the way to respond to it. The second question you have to ask yourself is, even if you fully see that the Rebbe fits the criteria, question is, are you able to explain this to everyone? Will they receive it? Will they understand what you're talking about? Maybe they first have to learn what a Rebbe is. Maybe they first have to learn what Mashiach is. So just to say words is what? What are you accomplishing? You want people to go away feeling that this is something I can identify with. Like I said, Rav Melch, teach someone the Rebbe's teachings. What the Rebbe teaches, what the Rebbe instructs. A person says, wow, that's something I want to embrace. If they want to embrace it, they're basically accepting this individual as a Rav or a Melech or both. That's the approach to take to these type of questions. So someone put the question as follows, like this. Dear Rab Simon, in the Sichas Azriya Mitzayra, Tafshin Nun Aleph, 5751, the Rebbe shows from the Gemara that identifying one's Rav as Mashiach is normal, and the footnote, the Rebbe emphasizes that the Talmidim didn't come up with the idea. Rather, the Rav informed the Talmidim that he is Mashiach. In other words, the Rebbe is telling the world, don't blame my Chassidim for proclaiming that I'm Mashiach. I gave them this idea. It's on me. Then the Rebbe says we should follow the example of the Gemara, and then the Rebbe identifies the Frierdiker Rebbe as Mashiach, 41 years after the Stalkus of the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Rebbe says this in public and has published it for anyone to read. Here's my question, or problem, he writes. I'm confident to teach the deepest and most complex chassidus to my community, and I reckon that they are a vessel for it. At the same time, I'm not smart enough to explain to my community that the Rebbe is Mashiach. Who am I to teach such a difficult inyan? And I reckon that my community is not capable of understanding such wild stuff. One day I will have the guts to extol the Rebbe the way the Rebbe extols the Frierdiker Rebbe. Love, love, love to you, Rab Simon. Thank you. Well, my advice to you, or to anyone else that has a similar question, maybe you should start demystifying Mashiach for yourself, and then also for your community and students and anyone you come in contact. Mashiach is a Basar Adam, is a physical human being, like Moshe Rabbeinu, that has the qualities of being a godly person. Like the Rambam says, he comes from the house of David. He's dedicated to Torah mitzvahs. He's inspiring others in the same direction. That's his whole life. We don't need anything here beyond that. So to show people and teach people, let's define Mashiach. Forget about who Mashiach is for a moment. Let's define what it is. What does the Messianic age look like? An age of world peace, of coexistence, higher consciousness that we've been discussing at length here, geulah consciousness. These things can be explained. If you can explain deep inyan Chassidus, you're explaining Mashiach. Just explain that geulah elokus, that's Mashiach. Mashiach is not just an individual walking around on earth that is a nice guy, a charismatic individual. Mashiach embodies a world that is geulah consciousness, and he's the leader. Like Moshe embodied Torah Moshe Kibbutz Torah Messinai. So first you have to demystify it for yourself, and it's not that difficult to do. The question about saying what the Rebbe is or not, firstly, if people learn it properly, they'll come to their own conclusions. You don't have to, it's not a brainwashing effort. It's not a programming. It's not about some mission, some crusade to teach people certain thing. Let them think for themselves. Teach them how to think, not what to think. How to think properly about God, about a malchus, about Mashiach, about the future, about a Rebbe, about Torah. That's the way to approach this. Okay. Another person writes, Hi Rav Simon, sends me a link to a Chof Shvat Tov Shinun Beis video and quotes a whole bunch of gedolim of our community. I could say who they are. He says, Rab Majeski, Rab Yael, Rab Heller, Rab Geradi, Rab Weinberg, etc., explaining that the Rebbe wants and needs us to do kabolas malchus. Why is it that after Gimel Tammuz, the inyan of kabolas malchus is no longer necessary? Keep up the great work, Rav Simon. So first of all, I can't speak for these Gedolei Yisrael. They said, and they said it at that time. I'm not sure what they would say today. And secondly, most importantly, what means kabolas malchus? I just explained kabolas malchus means accepting someone as Rav and Melech, as your authority and as your teacher. So absolutely. One should do that as much as they can. That's all I really have to say. What are some things I can do to be one of the 10 stubborn individuals that keep devising plans to bring Mashiach until we are finally successful? So he's referring to the language of the Rebbe, Chof Ches Nissan, where he said there'll be 10 vessels, ein action. So it's more than by the plans the Rebbe actually said at the end of the Sikha, 1, 2, or 3 people. Here he said 10 people, ein action to ad Moshe mitanemes. It's hard to say what you should do. I think it's about being sincere. It's about sitting in a corner, quiet, close your eyes, envision the Rebbe's words, envision the Rebbe speaking to you alone, no one else, and saying, Tut Altz Vos, everything you can do. Think about what your life would be, geulah, how you would behave. And then look at life as is and cry out ad Moshe. Maybe it comes down to a simple thing like that. But it has to be real and sincere, because the fact is we are living in geulah mentality. Even when we cry ad Moshe, it's still, that's what the Rebbe said, mitanemes. Mitanemes means you have to really feel. Maybe it takes learning a MyLife Chassidus, a few MyLife Chassidus. And then saying gewalt, gewalt in the language of the Alter Rebbe and Tanya. Davening, shedding a tear, not because of pain, because of the dissonance, because of the realizing how far we are from emes, from reality. Sing a nigun. Whatever it takes to be sincere. Is it easy to do? My great-grandfather of Gershom Bet Pahara said, when they asked him what he's looking forward to in the next world, a second that we don't lie, that we emes, to wake up to likeness. You're not lying, you're not sheker. It's not so easy not to be sheker. Sheker doesn't always mean you're lying outright. It means that you're living in a world that's not the reality. Reality is pure elokus. I can't see how someone can have that without learning Chassidus Pashat, adaita the nafsha properly, davening properly. Someone that really is in a state. Obviously it can come in many ways, but if you want it to be something sustainable. And beyond that, I think you should talk to Mashpia and Fabreng and hopefully have a moment of such as Seudas. There's so many other things I wanted to cover. I'll just cover one more thing since we're talking about the geulah. Our recent scientific accomplishments, like the resurrection of the DNA of an extinct wolf, a sign of geulah. So let me read the full question. The news is reporting that scientists have successfully resurrected a species of wolf that went extinct thousands of years ago by using DNA found in fossils. Does the Torah say if we are allowed or not allowed to do this? Maybe if a species is extinct, it's because Hashem wants it to be that way. At the very least, should we be excited that we are seeing these types of miracles in the beginning of an era of Mashiach that we are currently in? And as we are getting deeper into the era of Mashiach, even bigger miracles can and will happen, including Tchias HaMes. So let's break this into a few questions. First of all, I'm sure it doesn't we're not blind to the fact that that wolf, Gar Zevim Kevis, happens to be an extinct wolf. So that's just interesting correlation. That it's a sign, by all means. The fact that you can see in science that there's a concept of a DNA. I don't want to compare it to Etzem Luz. That's another discussion. But there's the idea and makes it more palatable. The idea of Tchisa Mesim, for sure. Like many other scientific breakthroughs that are signs. The Rebbe speaks about technology and science being signs that's showing us, first of all, the invisible forces of the world, and most importantly, showing us a certain unity, transcendence of time and space, and so on. The question about whether we should do it, allowed to do it or not, that I would leave to a bigger question, maybe be halachic issues. I don't know if it's halachic issues, but I don't know personally whether there's a fundamental problem. The fact that it went extinct, I don't know if that's Hashem's plan, and one should not tamper with it. If that's the case, many things you could say in science. Hashem's plan, there was no electricity for years. People didn't know it existed, and then they discovered it. So I don't know if you can really fit it into that type of context. So that's a separate question that needs to be addressed, I think, in a different context altogether. But above all, in our context, it's seeing in the geulah, seeing the aleph, whether it may be the atom that the Rebbe speaks about, how an atom has tremendous, how a little kabolas has so much echos, and all the other lessons we learn from scientific ideas and scientific breakthroughs is all part of putting the aleph into geulah and revealing the geulah. As much as I would like to continue with questions that are timely and relevant, I have to stop here. Simply time is of essence and limited. So I'll leave some things for next week. Some things I have to leave for next year. After Mashiach comes, well, Mashiach can come right away, so maybe even next week will be after Mashiach's coming. But above all, let us use this time period as we move from Chodesh HaGeulah into Chodesh Iyar, Chodesh HaRefuah, Ani Hashem Refecha, the Chodesh of Avram Yitzchak Yankov Rachel, Chodesh of the whole month of Seudas Moshiach, to use this period to refine ourselves the best possible way, which is itself a preparation for geulah amitis v'ashlema. Do whatever we can, Tut Altz Vos envisioning, teaching our children how to think geuladik, above all, and to act geuladik. So even if we're not there completely, you think and you act, as the Alter Rebbe told some Menagdim who said, look at your Chassidim, they're behaving like as if they're on high level Yerushalayim and so on, davening. And the Alter Rebbe said, it should be Mekoyim them, what it says in the Mishnah, that if a person makes himself like a pauper, he'll end up being a pauper. If a person makes himself a certain way, he'll end up being that. Meruba midateva in a good sense. How much more so here where you're not making yourself, because really the etzem of every Eid wants to do Torah mitzvah, says the Rambam Paskins, the end of chapter 2 in Hilchos Gerushin, that Rebbe brings often. And yet the Eid will, and is connected. It's just a matter, we are trapped in Golos mentality at times, the inner Golos Pnimi. So we have to learn to free ourselves, step by step, to say, perfect is the enemy of good. You go step by step, as best as you can. Hashem, the Rebbe should have Rahmanas on us already and say, okay, we've done a little, we'll do more, we'll do even more. With spreading Torah and Chassidus everywhere as much as possible. That should have Rahmanas and finally bring the geulah amitis v'ashlema. Take it from Yad Mamish now. And this has been MyLife Chassidus Applied, trying one extra step to add in Fotzes HaMeonis Chutza. We should already have the geulah amitis v'ashlema. Every Sunday we're here 8 to 9 p.m. Everyone have a good Chodesh, a geuladik Chodesh, a free Chodesh, the geulah amitis v'ashlema.
This program is brought to you by MyLife Chassidus Applied. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at chassidusapply.com/donate.